Shalom. This week we finish reading the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. We read two portions, a double portion, Matot and Masei. Matot beginning in Numbers 30, verse 2, and Masei in Numbers 33, verse 1. And most years, these two portions, Matot and Masei, are read together, except in a leap year. But generally speaking, these two portions are read together. And since everything has meaning, and nothing is coincidental, it's interesting to explore, is there some sort of deep connection between these two portions? Since everything is orchestrated and is really focused on us with divine intention, we should think to ourselves momentarily about the juxtaposition of these two portions, Matot and Masei, that end the book of Bamidbar. It can't just be without meaning that so often, as it is the case this year, these two portions are read together. So exploring this idea, we start to look at these two portions and we see that Parashat Matot begins with the concept of a vow, of making a vow. And the whole idea of making a vow is quite extraordinary and shows us something of the power of words with intention, words that are spoken with intention, that making a vow is so serious that one can actually effect a change on the status of something and transfer that thing from a status of mundane to a status of holiness, dedicated to the temple, for example. This whole idea of making a vow indicates the seriousness of a person's connection to the reality around him and the power of every individual to actually effect a change in the world around us. And it all comes from the words of our lips, and it all comes with intention. So making a vow is a very, very serious thing. And that's how the portion of Matot begins. And then the portion of Masei begins with the whole idea of the travels of the children of Israel throughout the desert. And we talked about this, that the whole idea of the desert wanderings of our forefathers, the 42 journeys that they made, this idea has tremendous ramifications for every individual. Because the idea of these trips, of these travelings, these wanderings, these way stations, as emphasized by the holy Baal Shem Tov and others, is that our lives are all about traveling and wandering. We go through a lot of things. We go through what we have to go through in this world until we come to, as the Torah's expression, the menucha and the nachala, the final resting place and the everlasting inheritance of Eretz Israel. We have to go through all of these different stops in the desert. And the children of Israel, when we count, we see that they actually had 42 different stops. And the Baal Shem Tov taught that every single person goes through these 42 journeys in his or her life. And it's a concept which is very far-reaching. And some of these journeys are for a day, a couple of days, some of them for months or years. And they're not just physical journeys. They're not just about a space or a place in that plane, although that is true as well. They're about the things that we have to go through in order to get to that everlasting resting place and that legacy, that inheritance. All the different routes that God gives us until we find who we really are and where we really belong. It's the stuff of life. It's exactly what it is supposed to be. Do we recognize it? Do we understand where we're going and where we're being led and the choices that we have to make and the decisions that are before us in order for us to finally get to where we have to be? That's another question. But this idea of the journeys is so amazing, and it applies to every individual. So what is the connection between these two portions? Because again, it can't be just accidental that so many years these two portions are read together. There must be a connection between the opening of each of these two portions that seal the book of Numbers, the idea of the power of a vow and the idea of the power of our personal and collective journeys. And the truth is, there is the most beautiful, breathtaking connection between these two ideas. The portion of Matot, which is the portion of the power of the vow, the power of our words, and the portion of Masei, which is actually the portion of the life cycle, of the birth to death experience on that metaphysical level of metaphor. It's the cycle of life. And the birth is like the coming out of Egypt and all the different way stations that we have to go through until we come to the ultimate inheritance of the next world, using Eretz Israel there as a metaphor. It's the life cycle. So what's the connection between vows and our living our life cycle, hopefully, to the fullest? And making a vow is also about getting the maximum out of something and putting all of our personal power behind it. And here's this incredible connection. The Midrash tells us about the unborn child. And this part of the Midrash is quite famous, and you've probably heard it. It's very beautiful. It talks about what the fetus is like, what it looks like, what it can be compared to in the womb of the mother. And of course, with uncanny accuracy, our sages of so many thousands of years ago tell us about how the fetus is kind of folded up onto itself in the mother's womb, and how its mouth is closed, and yet its umbilical cord is open, and it eats what the mother eats and drinks what the mother drinks, and it doesn't create any waste so as not to endanger the mother. But when it comes out into the world, that which was closed is opened, becomes open, and that which was open becomes closed. And it talks about the whole idea of the world of the unborn child in the womb, and it says that a candle is at its head, which is lit, and through the power of that candle, the child sees from one end of the world to the other. And it talks about, in this Midrash, about how this unborn child, every one of us, studies the entire Torah pre-birth, but then at birth, an angel comes and gives a little tap on the face, and all of that Torah is forgotten. And then the Midrash continues and tells us something remarkable. It tells us that before birth, every individual is administered a vow. Every single person takes a vow before birth. And the Midrash proves through various verses from Isaiah and the book of Psalms that this takes place indeed, and what that vow is. And the Midrash concludes and tells us, what is the vow that every unborn child in the womb utters before birth? That God says to every child, I exhort you and I make you vow that you will be a tzaddik and not a rasha, that you will be a righteous person and not a wicked person. However, even if the entire world calls you a tzaddik, calls you righteous, in your own eyes, you should be wicked. Meaning that you should never trust yourself, you should never give yourself credit, you should never allow yourself to become conceited. So there's this idea of a vow that every individual takes before birth, where Hashem literally administers this oath to each of us: be righteous, be a righteous person. Now, what does this mean? Because, as we emphasize consistently, every midrash is allegorical and carries tremendous poetic as well as psychological significance. What are our sages really telling us? Because we understand from this week's Torah portion that a vow can change the very status of something. And a vow is very, very powerful. And our words that we utter are very serious. And obviously the Midrash is telling us that if God administers a vow to every unborn child to be righteous, God would never administer a vow to us that he didn't think we would keep, or that he thought we would not be able to keep. And so the first thing that we realize is that God takes us very, very seriously and allows us this opportunity to commit ourselves, as it were, to following his way before we're even coming into this world. and that he expects us to keep our word, because he would never put us in a situation where, God forbid, we would be uttering falsely, proclaiming a false vow, and that he expects us to be able to do it. That's a very, very big expectation, and that's a very big discovery to make upon coming into the world, that God really knows that we can live righteously. So the connection between these two Torah portions is very profound, because the very juxtaposition of these two portions is actually alluding to this very concept that the life cycle, as alluded to in Parashat Masei, the birth and the life cycle of all the journeying that we go through in this world, was preceded by a vow. Just as Parashat Masei, the Parsha, the Torah portion of the journeys, is preceded by the Torah portion of Matot, which is the Torah portion of the vows, so too our birth and our life and everything that we go through and all of those journeys was preceded by Hashem administering to us a vow that we could live our lives to the fullest, to the maximum, to be the people that he knows that we can be. And he even makes us swear before we come out into this world that we will be tzaddik, righteous, and not rasha, God forbid, wicked. Because he knows that we can do it, and that's what he expects. And so each and every one of us takes that vow before coming into this beautiful world. And it comes out that we've already promised the type of life that we will lead as we go through all of the circuitous routes that we need to navigate in order to come to be the people that we need to be. We've already made a vow that we will live a good life. So let's do it.